Well, hello everyone. This is Dave Cohen on Guitar Tales, and we've been promoting this show for a little while now. We have a super special episode. A very famous guy who doesn't even look famous, Henry Vaccaro. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. I'm only famous in my own mind.
I think you're famous and more than that. I was on your Wikipedia page today. You're just straight out famous.
Uh-oh, I'm in big trouble now.
You are in big trouble. So the reason why I'm so thrilled to have you on, and I think why everyone else will be so thrilled to have you on, is that you were the one of the primary, if not the, actually in '95, you were the owner of Kramer Guitars, right? You were the last man standing,
Yeah,
right?
I was the last man standing, and I was not the brains behind Kramer. I was the money behind Kramer. So that's how it got started.
Yeah, it's such a great history, and we're going to cover a lot of different things in however long it takes us to do a Guitar Tales episode today. But I also see a very gorgeous guitar behind you. Just give us a preview, then we'll dig in a little deeper about it. What kind of guitar is that?
That's a Vaccaro guitar.
Oh, I can't wait to talk
It's
about
a
that.
throwback to the old original Kramer with the aluminum neck.
So that's a great segue because I once counted. I've owned in my little guitar playing non-career probably 30, 40 guitars. It leaps and bounds without a close second. My favorite guitar I've ever owned was my Kramer 250, which was the lowest model of your famous tuning fork aluminum neck guitars.
Wow. Well, what I did, that had a lot of negatives. The negatives, it was very heavy. It was neck heavy.
Yes, it was.
Okay, you felt that cold aluminum on your hand because the rails, the side rail and the center rail was aluminum.
Correct.
It was very costly to manufacture. And the positive was you got this great sound and a great sustain.
Oh my God, it was such a gorgeous guitar, and now to get a used one, forget it.
You got,
Thousands and thousands of dollars to get one.
well, what I did is back maybe 15 years ago, I started Vaccaro Guitar Company, and where I improved on the aluminum neck, but it still had the V headstock,
Okay.
and it was an incredible product, but we still had resistance because a lot of people did not like the headstock.
Really?
Yes, the first three endorsees, the Edge from U2,
I've heard of him.
yeah, okay, Lenny Kravitz,
Heard of him.
Kid Rock.
Yeah, I heard of him too.
Okay, and the problem was I didn't have the financing behind me to make the company propel to where it should. I didn't even have the money to advertise, and
Right.
in a couple of years, I just closed the company down.
That's on the Wikipedia page too, because it talked about Vaccaro guitars. I think in the earlier mid 2000s,
Yes,
like something like that, right? So because I want to so get to especially two important relationships, you and Eddie, and you and Johnny Cash. Let's work our way through the history and we'll bring ourselves up to those two. You were the owner of Vaccaro Construction, which was just really instrumental in redeveloping Asbury Park back in the day, right?
yes, I was the guy that put the whole redevelopment together in the 80s.
And I mean, from what I understand, billions of dollars in real estate you developed in your name, right?
Well, I did $1 billion in construction. My main business back then was building construction, and we did mostly public works projects. Why
Okay.
public works? Because you're gonna get paid. That's one thing at the end of the job. But I built over 30 schools. I did seven high rises. I did five hospitals. I did a prison in Trenton, a nine-story jail with an underground garage, and so I did some big stuff back in.
I've been in that prison in Trenton many times. I had clients there years ago, so I've been in every prison in Trenton. There's a couple of them, including Camden. I've been in a Camden prison, wearing my lawyer hat. So then, give us the story. How did it come to be that you connected with Kramer Guitars?
Okay.
At this point, you're nothing to do with music in your
No,
profession.
I don't even play guitar. I play the stereo and I play Johnny Cash music. That's the and I started my construction company in 1961. My father had died. My dad was a doctor. And he took care of all the poor people in the Asbury Park area, and he had office hours 7 days a week, unheard of. Morning hours, afternoon hours, and evening hours.
Wow,
And if that wasn't enough, every night he made house calls.
it's a
So
good man.
yeah, in October of 1959, my father was given a testimonial dinner by all of his patients. 400 and some people attended the dinner. And my dad was knighted by Pope John the 23rd. He sent a courier over from Rome, and he knighted my father into the order of St. George in Corinthia, which was an order for people that do humanitarian deeds. Well, the dinner was 7 o'clock that evening. Well, that meant that my father could have afternoon hours on Sunday and make a few house calls before the dinner. Went home, changed, puts on his tuxedo, attends the dinner. After the ceremony, still dressed in a tuxedo, he made house calls until after midnight.
Oh my
And
God.
he had this medallion around his neck. He was so proud. And the last patient he saw said, "Here comes Jesus Christ," and he's dressed in a tuxedo. My father went to sleep and he died the next night. A massive heart attack, 51 years old. I had left early that morning to go back to Villanova University. And after my dad died, I came home. I quit school, and I wanted to work with my hands. I always had this in me. I wanted to do construction. And I had an old backhoe. I started digging oil tanks. I put septic tanks in. I dug sewers, you name it, I did it. And over the years, the company grew to where I'm doing massive projects. I mean, 30, 40 million projects.
Wow. How quickly? So from you,
it wasn't that quick. It took several years, but it took a lot of, I mean, I worked like my father. Our family has a work ethic.
well, every success story I've ever personally witnessed or heard about starts with hard work. And whether it's music or whether it's business, whether it's construction, medicine,
Yeah.
I think, and from my own whatever successes I've achieved as an attorney, it's working 14-hour days.
There's no time limit. In my business, when there's work, you have to work.
Right.
Okay, whether it's snow, ice, rain, sleet, hail, or it's freezing, you got to work.
Right.
And I worked. So anyway, so my goal was every year I wanted to build a building. So I bought a tract of land and I started building a little small industrial park, 7 to 10,000 square foot buildings, and I quickly rented them. And I had one building vacant in 1976. It was a 12,000 foot building. And a young man comes to my office and he wants to rent some space to make guitars. I don't know anything about guitars. So he told me, he said, "We're going to revolutionize the guitar business." I said, "What?" And he shows me this aluminum neck guitar.
Right.
Blew me away.
Was that Kramer or the luthier he was in business with?
No. Initially, there was
Travis Bean, right?
There was no. Way back when there was the original partner in Kramer was Gary Kramer,
Right.
who was involved with Travis Bean.
Right.
Dennis Berardi, who owned a music store in New York City.
Okay.
And Peter LaPlaca, who was a former VP of Norland Music. That was the original core group.
Okay.
Started Kramer Guitars. Then they needed a money guy, and I joined them. Okay. So Dennis comes, shows me this. I was so impressed, I couldn't believe it. And he takes me over to a gentleman by the name of Phil Patillo, a very well-respected luthier. And I'm telling you, you give Phil a block of wood, you can come back, a few days later, and there's this magnificent guitar. And he's the one what they did was they took the Travis Bean, which was cut out of a solid block of aluminum. So you felt the whole back of the neck was aluminum, and they added wood inserts to it.
Right. Because if you were to do a cross section,
Right.
it was a T, and then in those little canoeish kind of things.
Right. But the Travis Bean, the whole back of the neck was aluminum.
I sort of remember those guitars.
Okay, so he changed it around, and we came out with our product, and so I made a deal with. So part of the story is this is crazy how it developed. I said, "Can I borrow a guitar? I want to show somebody before I invest. I want to show somebody." So he gave me a guitar, Dennis did, and I had a construction superintendent named Bill Ryan. Bill had a son, Billy Ryan, who played with Bruce Springsteen in one of the original bands back in the day.
From Freehold when he was still living there.
Yes. Well, Bill Ryan lived in Allenhurst, and his son.
Next door. Right.
So I gave him the guitar, and he comes back. He says, the next day, he said, "Wow," he said, "this thing is incredible. It's got this great sound, this great sustain." He says, "It needs to be tweaked." He says, "I'll be honest with you, it's heavy, but he said, I really think you got something." So now everybody's getting ready to go to a trade show. It was in July.
That's the NAM or
the NAM show.
Yeah.
It was in July in Chicago. Back then, they only had one NAM show a year, usually in Chicago. And then later, they had a winter show in Anaheim, and Anaheim grew so big that Anaheim became the main show, and then they would have a smaller show now in Nashville.
Right.
So Dennis says, I think we can sell $100,000 in guitars. Now, bear in mind, this is back in 1976.
That's a lot. Yeah.
I said, hey, I says, if you can make that sales number, I'll put the money in the company. Now, the show, I believe, lasted like from a Wednesday through Sunday. So maybe Thursday or Friday, I get a frantic call from Dennis. Henry, we're the hit of the show. You really got to get out here. Okay, well, Dennis got the first endorsee, which was Stanley Clark.
Oh my God.
Renowned bass player, and he loved the
School
bass.
days. I was just playing that on my phone the other day.
Okay, so now my secretary gets me a seat. I fly out to Chicago, and I could not believe this place. I mean, this is like, I don't know, maybe it's 100,000 square feet exhibition hall, loaded with people, loaded with musicians, exhibits. I had never been to a trade show before, and it just blew me away. Well, after he met that sales projection, we not only sold, I think we sold $500,000 worth of guitars.
Oh my God.
And we had some dealers giving us cash in advance to be the first one to have them, like Sam Ash and Manny's and those places, and Guitar Centers. I mean, this is, I don't even think Guitar Centers existed. Maybe they did, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't think, not Guitar Center, but Manny's existed.
And
Sam Ash was around back then. Yeah.
They were the big ones. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so enamored. I traded my ticket and I got a first class ticket going home. I said, man, I'm in big time. So anyway, fly home, and now all we had was a building. We didn't even have the factory set up. And Gary Kramer I had never met Gary before. I'd only met Dennis and then Peter LaPlaca and eventually Gary. Gary comes in from California, and Gary is going to handle the production. So we start setting things up, and initially, we were just going to have an assembly operation. We had a company called not Sports at first. It's a senior moment. Oh my God, Monteith. It's a company called Monteith. They're one of the largest importers in the world of exotic wood.
Okay.
So we had Afrormosia, Babinga, and all these crazy woods. And we convinced them to make the bodies and send us a completed body already finished.
And I read about this, that a lot of your early bodies were just some of the most exotic special woods, even down to the maple. It wasn't just regular maple.
It was maple and curly maple and all that kind of stuff.
I used to, when I had my Kramer, I bought guitar polish, and it was so gorgeous. I would fantasize about the 350, which I couldn't afford because that had the inlay,
Right.
But I would polish that guitar almost every day because the
probably couldn't play it, but you polished the hell out of it.
I was not a good player. Well, I'm still not a good player, but I certainly wasn't much of a player then.
Okay, so now we got Monteith is going to give us a completed body.
Right.
We then had, I forget who made the pickups. This is before we got them from DiMarzio. Somebody else made the pickup.
Right.
We had what was called a can cover that covered the pickups, which had to be polished.
That was a good look. I like that. I remember that.
Polish that. And then the neck is being made by Kaiser Aluminum. So now we get back and we got to start getting the factory set up. So I have to shell out $60,000 to Kaiser to make the mold for the aluminum. Okay.
Wow.
I sent him a check. Anyway, now Kaiser finishes with them. They did it in a factory in Erie, Pennsylvania. And they called us up. They said, they're ready. You'll have them in 3 or 4 days because we'll put them on a common carrier. I said, Dennis, we can't wait 3 or 4 days. So we rented a van. We sent Andy Papiccio all the way to Erie in a van, comes back with a box of blank necks.
Wow.
Now, Dennis had a machine shop at Wall Airport that's going to do the machining, put the wood inlays in them, put the fingerboard on it, and then machine it. No, excuse me. We were going to do the inlays and the fingerboard. Then they were going to machine it, and we were going to get back a neck that's ready for the paint shop. Well, the problem is, I think they quoted us like $25 a neck for machining. So we shoot out there with all the necks. The guy says, well, put them in the next room. I can't get to these for a couple of weeks. I said, what do you mean? He says, I can't. I got other work. And he said, by the way, the $25 price is going to cost you a lot more because I've been experimenting. And when I turn this on the lathe, a lot of the wood flies out and it rejects the neck. I said, oh, man. So Dennis says, what are we going to do? I said, Dennis, I learned a long time ago. If you're going to be in business, you have to be in business the right way. What do you mean? I said, we got to get our own machine shop. So I went to the bank, had a line of credit. Dennis hooked up with some guy in Philadelphia, and they flew down. They flew down in a little Piper Cub and took Dennis to Pennsylvania to look through these machines, then to Bridgeport to look at other machines. And he eventually comes back with a truckload of machines.
Wow.
We had the right machines, but the wrong model. Okay, we had a lathe, we had a milling machine, we had drill presses, we had cutoff saws, you name it. We had all this stuff, sanders and buffers. I physically went over to the factory, which was about a half a mile from my office, drove a forklift over, unloaded this thing, and started helping them set up. Then we set it up, and then I built a room around it. I mean, everything was ready to go, except we were having all kind of problems. First, as you would turn this on, well, I'm backtracking. First thing you had to do was glue this. The neck was like the shape of a T. It had to be milled down. The headstock, because they had what was called flask on it. When you put it in a mold, 2 pieces of the mold come together.
There's a little sticking around the edges, right?
Yes, that all has to come off, and it's got.
And you have to polish it.
Well, the last thing you do is polish it, but then you got to mill it down to the exact dimensions. Then you have to glue the wood inserts in it, which were a square insert. And then you have to glue
Weren't they triangle, the wood?
Yes.
Okay.
Then you had to glue the fingerboard on, which was phenolic. You had to put it in a clamp and wait 24 hours. Then you put it on a lathe, and then you turned it at high speed.
To buff it.
Yes, the problem was the cutter is now cutting 3 dissimilar materials. The wood, the soft aluminum,
and the ebony. It's not ebony, it was an ebonol, right?
Ebonol, which was a phenolic plastic.
Right.
So while it's cutting it, it's jumping like that, and that was called chatter, like that. So now when it came off the milling machine or off the lathe, you had to now sand all this shit out to get the chatter out. Wow. So it was smooth. Okay. Now you got to take and put it in a paint shop, because you have to paint the wood inserts or
finish them anyway.
Finish on them, right?
Yeah.
But to finish them, that meant you had to take masking tape and mask the aluminum.
And the edge of your fretboard, the ebonol.
Right, the ebonol, the aluminum, very time consuming. So now you finished it. Now you got to polish it, because you have to now polish the aluminum. So now you take that off, and now you got to put masking tape on the wood while you polish the. It was okay. Make a long story short, it might take, with the mistakes and the rejects, if you did 12 necks in a 2-hour shift, you did a lot.
Wow.
So we were having all kind of odds of that.
But the cool thing, the quality. I know it firsthand, and I know it from your story. The quality is through the roof on these things.
It was all made right in Neptune, New Jersey, with craftsmen. Okay. So now we've got the finished body comes from Monteith. So by the time you put the neck on it, you put the fingerboard on it. I mean, not the fingerboard, the can covers and the pickups and all that. Well, if you scratch a damn thing, you got to take it all apart and send it back to Monteith, because we didn't have a spray booth.
Wow.
Finally, we eventually got raw bodies. We put a spray booth in, and it really was a learning curve at a very expensive cost, and it was my money.
Wow. And it really, you created something that for any guitar player, even if they're new, it's iconic. And until I looked beyond your right shoulder, I would say it was never to be replicated. So let's jump forward a little bit, and let's talk about your first meeting with Eddie Van Halen. How did that happen?
Okay. All right. Well, there's a lot in between, but
I know.
I mean, an awful lot. I mean, we could have a whole show. One thing was, we're losing money. The metal necks we're doing maybe a couple $1 million a year and losing 300,000 a year.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm getting really tapped out now. I've been taking money from my construction company to support this monster. And anyway, so now our biggest dealer back then was Guitar Centers.
Right. Because now they are around.
Well, I think they're
by this time, yeah.
I think they're going under Chapter 11, but whatever.
Yeah.
But Wayne Mitchell, who was the original owner of Guitar Center, the guy was a marketing genius. He really was, because what he found out was, I think they have, when you're doing advertising, it's called an area of dominant domain, I think is the technical term. In other words, you put $1 here, and the same advertising dollar would hit all of his stores. So
Okay.
$1, he's hitting 5 or 6 stores in that area, as opposed to, having a store in New York.
Oh, it's called a DMA. I forgot all yeah.
Something like that. So he was a
Right.
genius that way. But another thing was, he had cash, and when you shipped, you got paid. And another thing he had no payables, and he had no warehouses. You would ship to individual stores as
Oh, wow.
a warehouse, and then they would pick it up. Okay. So, but you got to sell to them so damn cheap. You're trading dollars. Another thing I got to tell you about, back in those days, I don't know if you recall, the interest rate was through the roof.
17, 18% in some bad years. Yeah.
It was really bad. And when I say bad, okay. So now we need money. So we went to a factoring company. And back then, the banks were not allowed to factor receivables, but each bank had their own side deal with some company that they controlled that factored, right?
Right.
We're paying 4 over prime. And the deal was, if you take a receivable, you give it to them on Thursday. Friday, they put money in your account. So, you need money right away. So we give them all these receivables and they loan the money. The problem is,
You're getting ownership of your business.
Yeah, Peter LaPlaca is selling guitars to people that didn't buy them. That way we could send them an invoice, ship the guitar, and give the bank an invoice and get money. And then 60 days later, when a damn thing comes back, you got to do it again. Anyway, we're paying 21% for
So wait, so if there was someone named Paul at Guitar Center, you could actually say you're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul.
You got that right. Okay. So now along comes Eddie Van Halen. Okay. Dennis is on a plane. Back then, we had just signed a deal with a tremolo before the Floyd Rose. I think it was called a Rockinger.
I read about it.
I could be wrong. So, and somehow Dennis hooked up with Floyd Rose, and Dennis is flying to California to have a meeting with Wayne Mitchell from Guitar Centers. On the plane, he sees a young man that's got a tour jacket on, said Van Halen World Tour. So Dennis follows the guy to the luggage rack and says, "Hey, are you on a tour?" And he says, "I'm Eddie's guitar tech." I'm telling you, that's all Dennis needed to know. Within an hour, Eddie is with the guitar. Dennis is with the guitar tech at Eddie Van Halen's house.
Wow.
And he convinced him about our new tremolo. And
which was the precursor to the Floyd Rose, right?
Yes, correct. But then by the time the conversation got around to it, we now have the Floyd Rose. And he convinced Eddie that this is the best thing since sliced bread. We still had aluminum neck guitars then. And Eddie really loved it. So the problem is Eddie didn't like aluminum necks. So
right.
What do you do? Just like it's like having the only baseball bat and Babe Ruth endorses it.
Right.
So Eddie wanted a wood neck. We're in the wood neck guitar business. So that's about how it happened.
And then you first had some issues. Fender wasn't happy with what you were first putting out.
Yeah.
You modified it a bit. And then weren't you at a certain point in time the #1 guitar maker in the world?
No, not.
Still behind Fender and Gibson?
Okay. We were voted the #1.
Okay.
Guitar for the Practicing Musician magazine. They did a survey. And they said the #1 guitar over 500 in price, Kramer. The #1 under 500 in price, Kramer. So we had it all.
Wow.
Hard to take. And I have the magazine cover somewhere with that study on it. And Dennis was a genius as far as marketing. I mean, he was not a genius as far as running a business, but if you could control Dennis, the company would still be around today.
So did you ever meet with Eddie yourself?
With who?
Eddie. Did you ever meet with Eddie?
Oh, sure, of course. He would come to the factory. And when he came, Dennis had a home in Homedale, New Jersey.
Right.
And he and Valerie would stay at Dennis's house. They'd come to the factory, and you had to have a 6 or 8 pack of his Heineken beer, and you had to have a little of the white stuff around, the whole 9 yards.
And of course, white stuff, you mean the sugar for his coffee.
Yes, of course. Which he drank black.
Yeah, so, which was the 80s, so we understand.
So anyway, he was a cool guy, man. He would come to the factory. He would go in the paint room, the spray room, and sometimes paint it himself. Otherwise, he'd tell George, the painter, how he wanted painted. And had to help design a body and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's
Well,
really great. And then the iconic, I keep using the word iconic, but it's so appropriate for today, that the red guitar with the white stripes, that eventually Kramer began building that very special Frankenstein guitar, Frankenstrat guitar, right?
yeah.
That's amazing because that's, obviously you have, the Les Paul and the Strat and all that, but that particular guitar, the Frankencaster, what was it called? The Strat.
I don't know because it was a combination of a bunch of things.
Right, but when Kramer took that over, that's one of the most famous guitars ever built. Really,
Really, I saw a little thing on.
Frankenstrat. I think that's what it's called, the
I think I saw
Frankenstrat.
something on YouTube where Eddie's son Wolfgang paid tribute to his dad and said the first guitar that his dad gave him was that original Kramer guitar.
Wow, he just did a lengthy interview on Howard Stern. I've been
That's
meaning
what
to
it
watch.
was. He talked about Kramer on Howard Stern.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you build this amazing legacy, and I don't know where it lies in your timeline. I know I have your book. Let's segue to Johnny Cash now because he's like your best friend. How the hell does a builder from Asbury Park, from Neptune really, but who builds up Asbury Park? All right, fine. You end up, business-wise in bed with Eddie Van Halen. Where the hell does Johnny Cash come into this?
Okay, I'm Italian. Okay,
Okay.
Italian.
Vaccaro, really?
Yeah, Italian. At my age, you love Frank Sinatra. However,
Okay.
I love country music. And this is back in 1955 and 56 when I first heard some early Johnny Cash songs. I'm just mesmerized. Then when I went away to Villanova, out of the Philadelphia station, every once in a while you hear I Walk the Line. And I just loved that sound. I said, this is incredible. So now, fast forward, he was the first Johnny Cash concert I went to was at the
When you were serving in the Folsom prison, when you were
Pardon?
serving time, when he gave the live concert in the prison, you were an inmate, right?
I was. He was never in prison. He was in a couple of little county jails for drunk and disorderly, but never
But he
served
gave
time.
that famous concert. He gave a concert in the prison.
Oh, absolutely. That's what he did all the time.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. All right, so
Okay,
go on.
okay, you didn't know that? At one
I knew he did it. I didn't know he did it regularly.
he did it at one concert at San Quentin. You know who was sitting in the front row?
No.
Merle Haggard.
Really?
Yeah, he helped get Merle Haggard a pardon from Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
Okay, Merle Haggard was in the front row. Anyway, so I just love Johnny Cash music, and I think there was a place called Symphony Hall in Newark. I saw a concert. That was my first Johnny Cash concert. And then he would play regularly out at the Garden State Arts Center in Homedale, New Jersey.
Know it well.
Okay, meanwhile, I'm building, and building I was. I'm building a major hospital in Secaucus in the Meadowlands. Back then it was called Riverside Hospital. I think they changed the name to Meadowlands
They
Hospital.
did, and then it got bought out recently. I know that hospital.
Okay, well, it was initially owned by 5 doctors. It was a private hospital.
Right.
The money was raised privately, and,
Mhm.
it was owned by Dr. Cavelli and a couple other doctors out of Union City, and I built it. So I'm sitting in Dr. Cavelli's office, and he's telling me that the bank is making them get a management company to operate the hospital because they don't trust doctors to run a hospital. So he was interviewing a company out of Nashville called Hospital Affiliates.
Okay.
I'm looking through the book and I see Dr. Nat Winston on the board of directors. Well, I had just read Johnny's autobiography called The Man in Black.
Right.
It talks about how Dr. Winston helped get him off the pill habit. He was a psychiatrist and he would come to his house every day. June brought him there. So I arranged for Dr. Cavelli in Secaucus to call Nat Winston in Nashville to arrange for me to meet Johnny Cash backstage at the concert coming up the next spring at the Garden State Arts Center.
Who the hell would think of doing that? That's fantastic.
Do what you got to do. Okay. Now I show up and I meet him backstage at a reception, and I introduce myself as being in the guitar business. I want to have something in common. I didn't even, he never, for the next several years, I never even knew I was a builder.
Right.
Henry the guitar maker. So it's funny. So, now I'm talking to him and I said, hey, we got this incredible guitar with an aluminum neck. He said, what does it do? I said, you get this great sound. He said, well, look, we're staying locally at the Hilton Inn in Eatontown at exit 105.
Yep.
Why don't you come by there tomorrow morning around 9:30 and I'll introduce you to Marshall Grant, and Bob Wooten. Okay. This is why there's a God up there. So now I show up, and Marshall was expecting another guitar company because the House of Cash made arrangement with another guitar maker. The guy doesn't show up, and he thinks I'm the guy. So they let me in. Incredible. So I start talking, and I guess I can be a good salesman too.
Oh, you can.
I won't
Yes.
put all that on Dennis Berardi. I can be a good salesman.
Yeah.
Well, within an hour, I've got him in my car, driving to the Kramer factory, which was only 5 miles away down the road.
Right.
And that night on stage, the entire Johnny Cash band played Kramer aluminum neck guitars.
Wow.
Bob Wooten played a custom Kramer that we made for him. Marshall Grant played a Kramer bass, and Jerry Hensley played a Kramer rhythm guitar.
That's amazing. And then more than a business arrangement, you got really close with Johnny, didn't you?
Okay, yes, very close. I mean, I was at Paul Berta's funeral. You don't get any closer than that.
No, you don't.
Okay, so now I had a hobby, and the hobbies change over the years, but then my hobby was big game sport fishing in Bimini in the Bahamas. I had a captain down there, and the man was incredible. I would go down there just to be with this guy. I mean, Captain Jimmy Albury. I mean, a character out of a whatever you want to call it. I mean, just a real piece of work. But he held at one time. He had caught. He's the only man alive back then. Had 4 blue marlin over 700 pounds.
Wow.
What a fisherman. So anyway, I would go down there a couple of times a year, and I would take guests with me that I'm doing business with. I mean, they would never get a chance to fish in these waters. So anyway, I invited Bob Wooten and Earl Ball, Johnny's piano player, to go to Bimini. Well, we had the time of our life, and Bob hooks on a giant tuna, well over 1,000 pounds. And
Oh my God.
within 15 minutes, snaps the line. And he now is hooked. I mean, once you get that, you're hooked. Well, he couldn't stop bragging. So he says, Henry, why don't you ask Johnny? He would love this. I said, Bob, I'm too embarrassed. And I was. In some ways, I'm a shy person. I couldn't.
Right.
Now, I tell people I got to be friends with Johnny Cash through his stomach. He says, what are you talking about? Well, Johnny loved Italian food that you couldn't get in Tennessee. In fact, his housekeeper was right off the boat. She was married to the head of security, and I think the last name was Basilia or something. I'm not sure. But anyway, broken English and all that. And she was a great cook, but you couldn't get the ingredients out there. So there was a local deli called Peon Cones in Bradley Beach. And he had in the window the big cheeses hanging down and everything. He would make fresh bread every day. And anyway, I take a cooler and I would go over there and I get prosciutto, gabagool, fresh olive oil and homemade bread and prosciuttini. And I'd put it in a thing. I would get on Johnny's bus. We would sit down and they would eat because right after the concert, they're hungry.
Right.
On the way either back to the hotel or the next venue, they're eating. So that was how that happened. So I'm on his bus maybe 6 or 8 months after the Bimini trip. And he says, Henry, come here a minute. He said, Bob is telling me about this place in Bimini. He says, I'd love to go there with you. I says, you would? He says, absolutely. He clears his calendar. He says, think I can go next June. Wow. Call up Captain Jimmy, got everything set. And we made 5 fishing trips to Bimini.
Oh, wow.
Time of our life. One was memorable. Back then, there was a seaplane service called Chalks out of Miami. You would get on a seaplane, and 30 minutes later, you're in Bimini. It was incredible. Well, we're on this one flight, Johnny, myself, Bob, and a friend of mine, Gene Nito. And we had kind of a rough takeoff because you'd have to raise your feet up because the water's coming in the plane while it's going down the bay, right? So now we take off and we land in rough water in Bimini, and it's kind of shaking. So, and another funny thing, as soon as we got on a plane, we go down this little, not a runway, a concrete spillway into Biscayne Bay, and captain starts to taxi and he shuts the engine off. I said, oh my God, what's wrong? He gets out of the cockpit and looks back. He says, we got a problem. He says, you two fat guys got to sit up here to balance the plane.
Well, that's hysterical.
We had to move up to balance the plane, and he takes off. Anyway, he didn't know the one guy was Johnny Cash. I'm the fat guy, right? So we land in rough water, and Johnny gets off the plane. He says, Henry, he says, that was kind of a rough ride. would you mind if we flew back on a Learjet? No, that's okay with me. So he called his sister in Nashville, and they had a Learjet waiting to take us back.
Oh my God, that's
So
crazy.
anyway,
So you got this amazing history. You got these celebrities, and the time on Guitar Tales always flies. I want to make sure we get time to look at that gorgeous guitar behind you.
it's okay. I don't know how I can swing it over. I don't know if you can
Let's
see it.
see. Let me. Oh my God, look at that! Look at that headstock.
This is the new Vaccaro.
Oh my God, keep twirl. That's the light is getting it perfect. Bring it a little closer to you right now. All right, you might have outdone yourself from the '70s with that. That is
This
stunning.
is the best of Kramer. Took the best of it and got rid of the worst because in the back
Yeah, let's take a look.
you see wood.
Wow. Look, and are those shallers? You always had shallers in the past.
Yep. How about that?
Are they still shallers?
These are, but see, they have to be special made because the headstock is not as thick.
Yeah, that is maybe the best looking guitar neck I've ever seen. That is really something.
So that that's what's going on. Don't
That
you
is fantastic.
tell me half hour went by already.
Dude, we're 37 minutes into it now.
Oh my God. I can
I
talk.
could talk to you for 10 hours, but we always try to limit our show for today's short attention span for the kids out there. So what's the next plan for you for that guitar? So what's your goal?
Here's what I intend to do. Okay. It's very hard, if not impossible, to get in the guitar business today because all these big companies and all
Right.
the advertising dollars, and plus, I'm sure they buy the shelf space. In other words, if you want to be a Fender dealer, you got to buy X number of Fenders, or you're not a dealer anymore.
You gotta, yeah.
So, okay. So I'm looking at, and I've already had one one conversation with Gibson. I want to license them the neck and bring back the retro Kramer.
Oh, that is brilliant.
Okay, and you should see the bass. The bass is incredible.
Well,
So,
I know that you guys did that when you put out your original Kramer aluminum necks, it was 4-to-1 bass to guitar.
yeah, you're right because
Yeah.
the bass was incredible.
Yeah, they're stunning. So and there's that whole nostalgia piece to it. I think that's a brilliant marketing idea.
And they can bring back some of the old guys from the original Kramer days, like me, and maybe do it. Now, if that happens, that automatically legitimizes my neck.
Yeah.
Then I would go in a neck replacement business.
All right.
Yes, because the way I have this neck design, I can put anybody's headstock on it. It's
Oh,
not-
really?
Yes, this is the Kramer headstock now. The Kramer, like called the banana neck. I can put you a Fender headstock. I can do a Gibson. I can do a Jackson. I can do anybody's headstock on the aluminum extrusion.
I'm looking at that neck. It's just stunning. I think you correct me if I'm wrong, but I have never seen a pure aluminum headstock anywhere.
Incredible, right?
It's stunning.
Now,
So put me
now
number one on the customer list whenever you guys go into production.
I'm looking for an investor to help me launch the company. So maybe somebody will call in on your show.
Yeah, you never know.
Never know.
Well, Henry, I want to thank you so much. This was exactly what we built it for. We put a few teasers out on social media for a really special episode. We didn't say who it was yet. We just said a very special episode. If you like Eddie Van Halen, you want to watch this one. If you like Kramer Guitars, you got to watch this one. And you did not disappoint. So thank you so much for joining us.
You could do a whole segment on Michael Jackson on how he bought the company from me and defaulted it and screwed me out of millions of dollars.
So if anyone, we could do that. And I'll tell you what, there's a great description of that on your Wikipedia page. So if you folks are interested in hearing just a crazy music, Hollywoodish story, look up Henry Vaccaro on Wikipedia. There's a great description of that. I did research for it today. One of my friends is a Hollywood producer, and he said, Dave, do your research for this show. And I said, okay.
Well, I want to do a documentary, a couple, one about Kramer and another about my Michael Jackson experience. It'll blow your mind.
All right. Well, we may have to bring you back for that show.
I want to come back.
All righty. Well, Henry Vaccaro, thank you so much for joining us. This was really everything I hoped it would be. And I know our guests or our fans will really be thrilled with it.
Well, now, when does this podcast go on?
So here's the deal. So we are going to do a Facebook watch event which we always do. That's how we premiere our shows. And I will do two things for you. I will connect you on Facebook to it, but I'll also send you a secret private copy of the show.
Okay, great.
All right, fantastic. So everyone on Guitar Tales, this is Dave Cohen signing off. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. And more important than me, more important than our fans, Henry Vaccaro.
All right.
A legend, a legend. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, David.
Have a great night.
All right.
Bye-bye.